Yeah, let's go. I ain't the first with the curse, with the thirst that I wanna be better, not worse, man it hurts. I'm on this earth with my words and I put them all together, insert, cause I wanna have worth. Working hella hard till they put me in the dirt. Gonna go far, man, listen to
Welcome to Fantasy Football Truthers. Who should we draft #1 in fantasy football?
So working backwards and who you should draft #1 overall in fantasy football, starting with Derrick Henry. So when it comes to Derrick Henry, don't have much bad stuff to say. Still same guy, just 1 year older, a little bit more injury prone, but it's still Derrick Henry. So is he worth taking as the #1 overall pick? Unfortunately, I have to say no. There are better options at the running back position who have a better opportunity to finish as the #1 overall running back and the #1 overall player in fantasy football.
How about Brian Thomas Jr.? I had him on my fantasy football team last year and he did amazing. But I don't think he's going to be the #1 wide receiver this year. So he's not going to be my #1 overall draft pick.
What about Nico Collins?
Ooh.
I do have a strong affinity for Nico Collins.
Spicy.
I stole him last year in fantasy football. But unfortunately, I do think that there are other players, maybe even in his position, but definitely at the running back spot, that are going to score more points than him in fantasy football, unfortunately. So I can't take Nico Collins as the #1 overall pick in fantasy football.
How about Malik Nabers? He's a good wide receiver, but his quarterback is Russell Wilson. What do we think about Russell Wilson?
We don't like Russell Wilson.
So he won't be my #1 overall pick.
What about Puka Nacua? I do like Puka Nacua. I have a strong affinity for him too. Definitely has potential, if he can stay healthy, to be the #1 wide receiver, but gonna lose some targets to Devontae Adams, likes to get injured like I already said, and I do think that there's somebody else, again, at his position and at the running back spot that will score more points this year. So I can't take Puka Nacua, unfortunately, with the #1 overall first pick.
How about Amon-Ra St. Brown? Really, he could be the #1 overall wide receiver, but Ben Johnson is no longer with the Lions. So he can't be my #1 overall first pick.
Ooh, what about CeeDee Lamb?
Ooh.
I don't know if CeeDee Lamb can be the #1 overall player in fantasy football. There's a chance, a hope that he can regain his form from a couple of years ago where he was. I don't have that much confidence to take him #1 overall. So unfortunately for me, CeeDee Lamb cannot be the #1 overall first pick in fantasy football.
Ooh, Saquon Barkley. If I was picking first, he could be my first pick. But there's two things about Saquon. First, he gets injured a lot. Second, he had a lot of touches last year, which to me means that he could get injured this year. So for that reason, he can't be my first overall pick.
And we have finally come to the point in time where we've gotten to my #1 overall first pick. Currently, he's being drafted at the ADP #4, and that is no other than Jahmyr Gibbs. I understand that Ben Johnson's gone, but what I do know is that without Ben Johnson there, it doesn't really affect him. It doesn't really affect David Montgomery. Why? That offensive line is still a top 5 unit in the NFL. There's still going to be a top 5 offense with or without Ben Johnson's play calling. So what that means for Jahmyr is that he's still going to get the same number of opportunities. He's still going to be in the red zone relatively as much. He's still going to have just as good of blocking as he had last year. David Montgomery for the last 2 seasons has gotten injured. I don't see that trend stopping. I see it continuing. If this season David Montgomery gets injured earlier in the season, not the last 3 weeks, not the last 4 weeks, if he gets injured midway through the season, just like last year, instead of it being a 3 or 4 week stretch or the year before, we could potentially have a 9 to 10 week stretch of Jahmyr Gibbs being the most crazy fantasy football asset, fantasy football player that anybody could have on their team. And that would ultimately make him, and what I expect for him to be this year, the #1 overall fantasy football running back and #1 overall fantasy football player. And that is why, if I am drafting first, I will be taking Jahmyr Gibbs with the #1 overall pick in fantasy football.
For me, it's not Bijan Robinson or Justin Jefferson, it's Ja'Marr Chase. And the reason why I'm choosing Ja'Marr Chase as my #1 overall pick is because he led the NFL in yards, receptions, and touchdowns out of all the wide receivers, and he averaged 23.7 PPR points per game. He still has Joe Burrow, and he has a great connection with him, and he led the NFL in red zone targets. And the Bengals defense sucks, so the offense has to throw the ball more so they can score points. And unless he gets injured, he's going to be a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, and that's why he's my number 1 overall pick in fantasy football.
So there's our quick breakdown of everybody who's going in the first round of fantasy football, some quick thoughts about them, and then a little bit of an expose, very small, of who we are going to pick if we're picking number 1 overall in fantasy football.
If you liked today's video, please hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions for us about fantasy football or any how-tos, let us know down below.